They called her presence a distraction. Her uniform was too perfect, as if her very existence threw off the entire operation's balance. Can you imagine the frustration she must have felt? Lieutenant Commander Alexis Vega, a top performer in the military, sidelined during the most critical exercise, Chimera. Treated as if she were just another rookie who couldn't handle the pressure. But when disaster struck, when the systems failed and chaos descended, who was the first to step up? Alexis Vega. In less than 5 heart-pounding minutes, she executed a maneuver so bold, so impossible, that no one thought it could be done. She saved dozens of lives, flipped the script, and proved all her doubters wrong. Her excellence roared louder than any of their doubts. We're going to dive into acts of compassion that brighten the darkest days. So, what really happened? And if you think stories like this, raw, real, and powerful, deserve to continue, share your perspective and hit that subscribe button now to help us spread the word. Can you feel the weight of that moment? Picture this, a briefing room buzzing with anticipation, officers running through tactical displays, checking every detail like their careers depended on it, because they did. The Chimera exercise was set to begin, and the Pentagon officials were in the room, their eyes fixed on every move. They were preparing to decide if this elite quantum response unit deserved more funding and high-stakes deployment opportunities. Every officer in the room knew how high the stakes were. But there she stood, Lieutenant Commander Alexis Vega, poised and focused, her posture flawless. She was the epitome of military excellence, yet when Colonel Harrington began assigning field positions, her name was never called. Can you feel that sting? The subtle shift in the room, the uncomfortable glances exchanged between the male officers, the quick judgments they made. Major Reynolds even let out a smirk, not even bothering to hide it. Harrington continued assigning roles, Alpha Team to Captain Mercer, Bravo to Major Reynolds, Charlie to Lieutenant Commander Davis, but not a single word about Alexis. She stayed silent, a mask of professionalism, but her heart raced. She knew exactly what was happening. And when Harrington finally called her name, it wasn't for a field position. Lieutenant Commander Vega, he said, you'll be stationed in the command center. Observation duty. The words hit her like a slap. Can you imagine the hurt of that moment? The top performer, the one who had aced every test, led every mission, reduced to sitting behind a desk. And what was her response? Yes, sir. Just 2 words. Calm, clear, professional. She didn't flinch. She was dismissed, made to feel irrelevant, but she said nothing. Can you feel the weight of her silence? The calmness that hid the fury within? As the briefing ended and the officers scrambled to prepare, Alexis methodically gathered her materials. Every movement was calculated, precise, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Lieutenant Park, the comms officer, caught her eye for just a moment, offering a quick look of sympathy before quickly turning away. Then, like a final blow, Colonel Harrington approached her, standing just a little too close. The Pentagon observers will be focused on field performance today, Vega. This is critical for the unit's future, he said, as though offering her some kind of consolation. Alexis didn't flinch, her coolness unwavering. I understand, sir. But Harrington wasn't finished. He met her eyes, and she could feel the condescension in his gaze. Your qualifications aren't in question, but your presence in the field tends to create distractions. The observers will be focused on operational cohesion, not individual performance. There it was, the unspoken truth. Her perfection, her attention to detail, the very things that made her exceptional, were the reasons she was sidelined. The men couldn't focus when she was around, not because of her, but because they couldn't handle it. And instead of recognizing that, it was always her fault, her disruptive influence. Can you feel the injustice? The frustration, the disbelief? Harrington continued, the command center will give you full visibility. Consider it a learning opportunity. A learning opportunity? How patronizing. Understood, sir, Alexis replied, her voice steady, though her heart was seething. As Harrington walked away, she moved toward the command center, her steps even and determined. The corridors of the Advanced Combat Systems base felt endless, filled with the hum of the quantum defense systems she knew inside and out. She had studied them for hundreds of hours. She knew the technology better than anyone. Isn't that incredible? When Alexis arrived at the command center, the chaos was already in full swing. Technicians ran last-minute checks, support staff scrambled to adjust stations. Alexis settled into her observation post, conveniently far from where the real action was happening. But she didn't mind. Her eyes were sharp, and her mind was laser-focused on the data flashing across her screens. She would watch every detail. Lieutenant Park caught her eye again and gave her a subtle nod as he set up his comm station nearby. He was one of the few who didn't treat her like a problem. "Quite the spotlight today," he said, adjusting his headset. "Half the Pentagon brass will be watching." "All the more reason for a smooth operation," Alexis replied, her voice calm, controlled. Park leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, the comm station gives the best overview. Not a bad spot if things go sideways." A small smile tugged at Alexis's lips. Park got it. He understood exactly what she was facing. He knew what it was like to be sidelined despite being the most qualified in the room. "Let's hope nothing goes sideways," she said, but there was no mistaking her readiness. She was prepared for anything, even though she didn't want to admit it. Above them, the Pentagon officials filled the observation gallery, their eyes occasionally drifting down to the only officer in the command center who wasn't allowed to participate. They all knew Alexis's reputation. She was the officer who had outperformed everyone, and yet here she was, stuck in the background. Her heart pounded as she watched Major Reynolds swagger through his team, Captain Mercer checking his gear. Both of them, she had outperformed in every way, yet there they were, in the spotlight, while she remained in the shadows. Isn't that infuriating? Colonel Harrington entered the command center with his usual air of authority. The Pentagon officials straightened in their seats, ready for the show. "Gentlemen, today's Chimera exercise will showcase our elite unit's ability to counter next-generation threats against quantum-secured installations," he declared, his voice full of practiced confidence. "The Quantum Response Unit is the cutting edge of our defensive capabilities." Alexis kept her attention on her screens, but in the back of her mind, she ran through diagnostics of the quantum defense grid. The numbers on her display danced in front of her eyes, a chaotic blur of data that most officers would have ignored. But not her. She could see patterns where others saw noise. She was the best, and she knew it. With just minutes before the exercise began, Alexis ran one final check. But then, something caught her eye. A small fluctuation in the quantum grid's reference calibration. Most people would have dismissed it, but not Alexis. She'd spent too many hours studying this system to ignore it. A quick diagnostic confirmed her suspicion: a cascade error was forming in the system. Small now, but if it grew, it could be catastrophic. She glanced at Harrington, deep in conversation with the Pentagon brass, then back at her screen. The fluctuation was growing. She had to decide, should she say something? Protocol demanded it. But would she be dismissed again? She didn't hesitate. "Colonel," Alexis called, her voice steady but firm, "I'm detecting a minor anomaly in the quantum grid's reference calibration." Harrington turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Specifics, Commander Vega," he snapped. "A recursion error in the identification protocols, sir. Currently at 0.03% deviation, but it's increasing with each cycle." Major Reynolds, who had just strolled in for the final briefing, scoffed and laughed. "Systems designed with a 2% tolerance, Vega. It's probably just pre-exercise calibration." Harrington nodded, clearly siding with Reynolds. "Thank you, Commander. Noted in the log. Continue monitoring." He turned back to the officials, dismissing her completely. Can you feel her frustration? The thing she had spent hours studying, the potential risk she saw, was being brushed off like it didn't matter. She logged the anomaly, tapping in precise timestamps and metrics. Park caught her eye again, offering silent support. The countdown reached 5 minutes. The field teams reported ready. The command center hummed with activity, but Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The anomaly continued to rise, now at 0.06%. Safe? Yes. But growing faster than she could ignore. Then, at the 10-minute mark, as the exercise began, the anomaly spiked again, now at 0.12%. The system was being pushed harder with each passing second. She raised her hand, voice steady but urgent. "Colonel, the anomaly's correlating with peak system loads. We should run a precautionary diagnostic before the next phase." The room fell silent. Pentagon officials turned their attention to her. Harrington's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Commander Vega. We'll consider that after this phase." Reynolds sneered from across the room. "If you're bored over there, Vega, maybe you should grab coffee for the team instead of chasing non-existent problems." A few officers snickered, but Alexis wasn't laughing. How could they be so blind? How could they dismiss her expertise like this? This was the moment. She had warned them, but they wouldn't listen. How much longer before the problem became too big to fix? How long before the system collapsed, and she was the only one who saw it coming? The room was so tense, you could almost feel the weight of the silence pressing down on everyone. Can you imagine what that felt like? Several Pentagon officials sat with furrowed brows, completely baffled, completely unaware that the quantum system they had come to evaluate was starting to show signs of serious trouble. Colonel Harrington's face tightened ever so slightly, just enough to give away his unease, his frustration with the situation. "Thank you, Commander Vega," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "We'll consider that after the current operational phase." Major Reynolds, with no attempt to hide his growing frustration, rolled his eyes, dismissing Alexis as if she were an annoyance. "If you're bored over there, Vega, maybe grab coffee for the operational team instead of chasing problems that don't even exist." His voice dripped with sarcasm. A few officers snickered, but quickly stifled their chuckles, trying to mask them with awkward coughs when Harrington shot them a glare that could have melted steel. The tension in the room was palpable as the Pentagon brass exchanged nervous glances, their attention divided between the ongoing Chimera exercise and this sudden, escalating drama unfolding in the command center. Can you feel that sting of being dismissed? Alexis stood there, professional and calm, as the room seemed to breathe with the weight of the moment. Lieutenant Park, stationed at his comms post, wasn't about to stand by silently. "I believe Commander Vega is performing her assigned duty by monitoring the systems," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. "The log will show she reported the anomaly before the exercise even started." His words rang with quiet authority, but Reynolds wasn't having any of it. "The quantum grid has triple redundancy and a 2% tolerance, Park," he sneered. "Watching numbers tick up by decimal points isn't helping anyone." The mood in the command center shifted. Alexis knew she was right, but she had to sit through it, had to endure the ridicule and dismissive remarks. She didn't let it show on her face, though. Her expression remained calm, unyielding, a testament to her years of training. Harrington, eager to shut down the debate in front of the Pentagon officials, barked, "Continue monitoring, Commander Vega." "Major Reynolds, let's move on to the next phase parameters." Alexis gave a crisp nod, keeping her professional distance, even though every fiber of her being was burning with frustration. As the officers returned to their duties, the room's tension eased, but you could feel the storm was far from over. Alexis turned back to her monitors, her eyes scanning the data once again, checking and rechecking the numbers. How could she stay so poised under that kind of pressure? Was it the sheer weight of her professionalism? Or something deeper, an unwavering sense of duty that kept her calm in the eye of the storm? Whatever it was, it made her different from everyone else in the room. 20 minutes later, as Alexis's eyes flicked over her screens, a red flag appeared on her display that sent a chill down her spine. The anomaly had spiked to 0.23% during a particularly intense defensive maneuver. Her fingers flew across her terminal, pulling up historical data and comparing the readings to baseline metrics. The pattern was crystal clear now. Every time the system demand surged, the anomaly spiked. And it wasn't resetting. It wasn't just a glitch anymore, this was a ticking time bomb. Her mind raced. She couldn't ignore it. With swift precision, she opened a secure terminal and dove into the quantum grid's architecture specs, searching for answers. What she found made her blood run cold, a designer's note buried in the logs. It was a warning about theoretical recursive errors under heavy load conditions. The note had been marked resolved during final testing, but the signature algorithm matched the anomaly perfectly. Why hadn't anyone listened? She pulled up her own vulnerability analysis, submitted 6 months ago, after countless hours studying the grid. She had flagged this exact risk and urged for additional fail-safe protocols. But the report? Stamped, reviewed, no action required, signed off by Colonel Harrington himself. The sting of that dismissal was sharper than ever. Her screen chimed again, snapping her back to reality. The anomaly had jumped to 0.41%. It was still within the so-called safe limits, but it was accelerating faster than anyone could have predicted. She knew the protocol, she had to report it. But after everything that had already been ignored, would speaking up again make her seem like an attention seeker? Or should she stay quiet and risk the system spiraling out of control? What would you do if you were in her shoes? Before she could decide, the sound of a piercing alarm filled the command center. A red warning flashed on the main tactical display. The quantum grid had shifted its threat assessment parameters. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Harrington's head snapped up. Status report, he demanded, his attention now fully on the operational stations, his earlier calm completely gone. Grid showing adaptive parameter shift, sir, the systems officer said, his voice tight. Still within norms, but unusual for a controlled exercise. Alexis's eyes flicked to her monitor. The anomaly was now at 0.67% and climbing rapidly. The link between system load and the anomaly was undeniable, and with the next phase about to push the grid to its limits, things were looking grim. Sir, Alexis called, her voice steady but urgent, the grid anomaly has spiked exponentially in the last 10 minutes. I strongly recommend pausing the exercise for a full diagnostic. Harrington's expression darkened. Commander Vega, we're in the middle of a critical demonstration with Pentagon oversight. The system is within safe parameters. With respect, sir, Alexis pressed, the acceleration pattern suggests we'll exceed those parameters in the next phase. Major Reynolds stepped forward, his frustration now boiling over. Colonel, may I suggest Commander Vega be relieved if she can't follow protocol? Her interruptions are throwing off our focus. The Pentagon officials were no longer just watching the exercise. Now they were riveted by the growing conflict in the command center. Every set of eyes in the room turned toward the heated confrontation. Harrington, sensing the scrutiny from the brass, snapped, continue monitoring, Commander. Report through proper channels if parameters hit warning thresholds. Major Reynolds, proceed with the next phase. Alexis gave a crisp, yes, sir, but as she turned back to her screens, her gut churned. How could they ignore this? She had done everything by the book. She had followed protocol. But they weren't listening. As Reynolds rejoined his team and the exercise hit its most complex phase, the quantum grid groaned under maximum load. The anomaly climbed higher, and just as Alexis feared, a second alarm blared through the room. The main tactical display flickered, locking onto a new warning, identification parameter drift at 1.3%. Harrington's calm facade faltered, a flicker of worry flashing across his face. Still within tolerance, he said, though his voice was strained. Continue operations. But Alexis's monitor told a darker story. The anomaly shot up to 1.42%, then 1.57% in a matter of seconds. Each defensive move in the exercise was pushing the system closer to collapse. This wasn't just a glitch anymore, this was a catastrophe waiting to happen. A third alarm wailed, louder this time, and the Pentagon officials exchanged nervous glances. "Sir, identification parameters at 1.8% drift," the systems officer called, his voice now tight with panic. "Approaching maximum tolerance." Harrington, still holding on to whatever control he could, barked, "Implement standard stabilization protocol." The systems officer's fingers flew across his console. "Protocol initiated, sir." A beat. No effect. Drift still climbing. Alexis's heart pounded in her chest. She pulled up emergency override protocols, but the cascade failure was already underway. Standard procedures weren't enough. They weren't built for the kind of recursive error she had warned about months ago. The command center exploded into chaos. Warning lights flashed across every display. The quantum grid began misidentifying friendly forces as hostile targets, triggering the system's active defense mechanisms. Can you imagine the panic? "Sir, the grid's activating real defensive countermeasures against our personnel," Lieutenant Park shouted from comms. "Field teams report live weapons coming online." Chaos. Absolute chaos. Officers scrambled, trying to enact emergency protocols, but nothing was working. "Shut it down." Harrington screamed, but his words were swallowed by the mounting panic. "Full system reset, authorization Harrington Alpha 70. Reset rejected, sir," the systems officer cried. "Grid's in autonomous defense mode and has locked out command authority." On the field monitors, exercise participants dove for cover as defensive turrets locked onto them, the very system designed to protect them now turning against its operators. "Casualties in Sector 3, a monitoring officer yelled. "Medical teams deploying." The situation spiraled out of control, fast. Alexis watched in horror as the grid continued to misfire. But in that split second, as everything seemed to collapse around her, something clicked. She remembered her own vulnerability analysis, the one no one had taken seriously. She had the answer. Without hesitation, she grabbed Lieutenant Park's badge and slipped it into her pocket. Without a word, she headed for the door, her focus laser-sharp. Harrington tried to stop her, but it was too late. She didn't look back. The emergency exit hissed shut behind her as alarms blared. What was she doing? Could she actually do the impossible? She didn't have time to think about that now. But it wasn't pointless. Alexis had a plan, one that no one else had considered. She was about to prove everyone wrong. In the command center, the air thickened with tension. Can you imagine the intensity? It felt like every person in the room was holding their breath. Major Reynolds, usually so smug and sure of himself, was visibly stunned. "System vulnerability report located, sir," an officer shouted, pulling up Alexis's 6-month-old document onto the main screen. It was a bombshell. Alexis had flagged the exact recursive error that was now threatening the entire operation. Her report had been ignored then, and now, here it was, proof of her foresight. Colonel Harrington's face darkened as he scanned the document, his eyes narrowing when he saw his own signature dismissing it. "Why wasn't this implemented?" he demanded, his voice colder than before. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado slipping away. "The committee decided the theoretical risk didn't justify the resources," he muttered, clearly rattled. Meanwhile, Alexis was at Junction Point Alpha, moving with lightning speed as she swiped Lieutenant Park's security badge and bypassed standard protocols. She was setting up a delayed execution sequence. Can you even believe the guts it took? "She's setting up a timed protocol at each junction," the systems officer exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. "She's trying to coordinate the manual override remotely." Alexis didn't hesitate. As soon as she finished with Alpha, she charged toward Junction Point Beta, which was on the other side of the base. The path? Right through the active training grounds, now full of live defensive countermeasures. She'll never make it through that live-fire zone. Reynolds grumbled. The systems are fully armed. But Alexis? She moved with a calm precision that was almost otherworldly. She slid between cover points, timing her steps just right to evade defensive sweeps. It was like watching someone who had studied the system's every quirk for hours, no, years. My God, a Pentagon observer gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. Is she calculating the defensive algorithms in real time? Even Colonel Harrington stayed silent, his eyes locked on the monitor as Alexis reached junction point beta and executed the exact same programming sequence. The room buzzed with rising tension. Medical teams were already scrambling to rescue personnel trapped by the rogue systems. 2 minutes until her alpha sequence activates, the systems officer yelled, glued to the screen. She'll never make it to the third junction in time. But Alexis? She didn't stop, her determination unwavering, her focus laser-sharp. A sealed security door blocked her path to Junction Gamma, the final target. Did she hesitate? Not for a second. She pried open a maintenance panel, hot-wiring the emergency override in an instant. Where the heck did she learn that? Reynolds blurted, his earlier arrogance giving way to genuine respect. The room's energy shifted. Lieutenant Commander Vegas logged over 300 hours of voluntary system architecture study beyond required training, an officer reported, pulling up Alexis's flawless service record. She's certified in every subsystem on base, even maintenance protocols most officers wouldn't touch. Alexis had learned it all, on her own time. And now, she was saving them all. With a swift motion, she cleared the door and sprinted down the final corridor. At the far end, a defensive turret activated, its targeting system locking onto her. What did she do? In an action movie-worthy move, she yanked off her jacket and tossed it aside. The turret swiveled to track it, and she slid under its firing arc, reaching Junction Point Gamma with only seconds to spare. Talk about a heart-stopping moment. The room fell into a dead silence as Alexis swiped Park's badge at the Gamma terminal. Her fingers flew over the controls, entering the final sequence just as the countdown hit its critical moment. Remote sequences aligning, the systems officer shouted, his voice full of disbelief. 0.3 second synchronization window approaching. The room held its collective breath. For a moment, nothing happened, time seemed to stretch, frozen in anticipation. Then, all at once, the alarms stopped blaring, the emergency lights turned off, and the main tactical display flickered, then stabilized. Defensive systems shut down across the base. System reset confirmed, the systems officer yelled, his voice thick with awe. Quantum grids back to normal parameters. Defensive countermeasures deactivating. Someone whispered, she did it. She actually pulled off a triple-point manual override. Can you even wrap your mind around that? On the screen, Alexis stood at the Gamma terminal, double-checking the system's stabilization. Then, with an air of confidence, she straightened up, her posture as perfect as always. Without so much as a word, she walked back through the now calm facility, moving with the same unshakable determination that had driven her through the chaos. Emergency medical teams were finally able to reach the injured, and damage reports flooded in, showing just how close the base had come to catastrophe. Alexis had saved them all, with less than 5 minutes on the clock. 4 minutes and 37 seconds later, the command center door slid open, and Alexis Vega walked in. The room went utterly still. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder from a near miss with defensive fire, and a thin line of blood trailed down her cheek where debris had grazed her. But she walked in as if nothing had happened, unshaken, unstoppable. Isn't that mind-blowing? She walked straight to Lieutenant Park's station, where medics were tending to the still unconscious officer. Without a word, she placed his security badge back on his console, then turned back to her observation post, like she hadn't just saved the day. The room was frozen, heavy with awe. Colonel Harrington approached slowly, the silence nearly suffocating. Behind him, Pentagon officials exchanged looks, their eyes wide, their tablets capturing every moment. "Commander Vega," Harrington said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard, "that was an extraordinary action." Alexis, cool as ever, replied, "The override succeeded, sir. System diagnostics show the quantum grids back to normal. The recursive error's been purged." She was calm, collected, after all that chaos. Before Harrington could speak again, Reynolds stepped forward, his usual cockiness nowhere to be found. He snapped to attention and delivered a sharp salute. One by one, the officers followed suit, even Harrington, after a brief hesitation, raising his hand in rare respect. Alexis returned the salute, her face revealing nothing of the storm inside. The lead Pentagon observer broke the moment. "Lieutenant Commander Vega, we need to discuss your immediate reassignment. Your talents are wasted here." For the first time, a faint smile flickered on Alexis's lips. "With respect, sir," she replied, "my report on remaining system vulnerabilities needs attention first. There are more recursive patterns to fix before another exercise." She was already thinking ahead. Always. 6 months later, Alexis stood tall in the Pentagon briefing room, her commander insignia gleaming under the lights. As she wrapped up a presentation on next-generation quantum defense protocols, every top military official hung on her every word. Colonel Harrington, sitting in the third row, was a changed man. No more dismissive glances, just diligent note-taking, nodding at every point. Major Reynolds, now watching with quiet respect, had clearly learned a lesson. The recording of her impossible override was now required viewing in tactical training. Alexis never brought it up. She didn't need to. As the brass filed out, Alexis noticed a young female lieutenant entering for the next presentation, clutching a stack of materials, nervous but determined. Some officers barely glanced at her, the same dismissive looks Alexis had faced for years. But the young woman held her poise. Alexis, gathering her things, crossed her path deliberately, their eyes meeting. A silent understanding passed between them. The lieutenant's posture straightened, mirroring Alexis's quiet confidence. She stepped up to the podium, and Alexis couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. No words were necessary, excellence had already spoken louder than any critic ever could. Doesn't that give you goosebumps? Thanks for joining us on this intense ride. If it resonated, hit subscribe, ring the bell, don't miss out. Here's to the silent sacrifices, together, we're unstoppable. See you next time.